My fiance swiped my credit card 2 weeks before our wedding, so he could take his mistress on our honeymoon getaway. I went nuclear when I found out, but his family. You know that gut-wrenching feeling when your entire world is about to change? Well, mine didn't just change, it exploded. 2 weeks before my wedding, the man I was supposed to marry, my fiancé Mason, not only cheated on me, but he actually stole every last penny I had saved to take his mistress on our honeymoon. Can you even imagine that level of betrayal? We had our perfect wedding venue booked. Everything was set. Just the very last bit of the deposit left to pay. Then Mason comes to me, all smiles, asking for the biggest favor ever. We'd been together 5 years and I loved him, or at least I thought I did. But I'd started to realize that Mason had another deeper love: money and luxury. Even though his family was loaded, he was incredibly stingy. So when he asked to borrow my credit card for just a minute, I didn't think twice. I just handed it over, assuming it was for something simple like a takeout order. I even saw him and his brother, Ian, in the living room tapping my card details into their phones. Still, I wasn't suspicious. 20 minutes later, my favorite Thai food showed up and I figured, see? Nothing to worry about. Oh, how wrong I was. 3 days later, I called the wedding venue, ready to pay off the final couple $100. That's when everything started to unravel. They told me my card had declined. My heart actually skipped a beat. Declined? I said. That's impossible. I had about $15,000 in there just a few days ago. I asked them to try again, feeling a knot form in my stomach. They did. Declined again. That's when true panic set in. My stomach dropped like a stone, my hands started trembling uncontrollably. I practically sprinted to my computer, heart pounding, to check my bank account. And there it was. A big, fat, horrifying $30 remaining. My face must have gone ghost white. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking so badly, I misdialed 3 times before finally getting through to my bank's customer service. I tried to explain, my voice cracking, what was happening. That's when the lady on the other end dropped an absolute bombshell. She told me that a few days prior, my card had been used to book multiple week-long stays at luxury resorts on the opposite side of the world. What? That couldn't be right. Mason and I already had our honeymoon paid for, and he knew Dubai gave me heatstroke. It couldn't have been him, right? I asked her for the exact dates and times of these transactions, and what she told me next. It made me feel like I was going to pass out right there on the spot. The dates and times matched exactly when Mason and Ian had taken my credit card. I just hung up the phone. I couldn't even speak. I sat there on the couch, completely numb, still in this weird state of denial. I grabbed my phone again, desperately searching for some hardcore evidence, anything to prove this wasn't real. What I found was somehow even worse. Not only had Mason and Ian blown my entire bank account on a lavish vacation for themselves in Dubai, but they'd also paid for their mistresses to come join them. The second I saw the proof, my body just went into shock. Hyperventilation. A full-blown panic attack. I ran to the bathroom and started violently puking my guts out. I retched for what felt like an eternity, probably 30 minutes, sobbing uncontrollably the entire time. I was completely, utterly broken. And guess what? Just as I was at my absolute lowest, Mason and Ian came home. To add insult to injury, I was still doubled over, heaving near the toilet, when I heard Ian sarcastically ask Mason if he was going to help me out. Mason's response, muttered quietly under his breath, but loud enough for me to hear, "I'd rather do anything than help that bimbo." Those words. That was it. That was the nail in the coffin. The final brutal punch to the gut I needed. Because from that moment on, all I felt was pure, unadulterated rage. Mason thought I couldn't hear him. He thought I was just his dumb, loving bimbo wife who paid for everything. But what he didn't know was that despite everything, I still held all the cards. I walked out of that bathroom and then out of that house with my head held high, a terrifyingly clear goal in my mind. My first stop was the bank. I needed concrete, physical records of every single one of those transactions. I remember standing in line trying so hard to keep it together. But I must have looked like an absolute disaster, puffy, red eyes, hair a mess. The teller actually looked genuinely concerned when I finally got to the front. I tried to explain my situation as calmly as possible, but my voice kept breaking, cracking with every word. She didn't hesitate. She immediately called over the manager. They led me to a private room which, honestly, felt like something out of a movie. I showed my ID, and with a surprisingly steady voice, requested detailed transaction records. The manager, Sarah, typed away on her computer, her fingers flying, and then printed out everything I needed. The paper trail, it was damning. Multiples of luxury hotel bookings in Dubai, first-class plane tickets, yes, first class, and even high-end restaurant reservations. All of them made within minutes of each other, on the exact day Mason had my credit card. Sarah looked at me with such raw sympathy. She suggested I file a fraud claim. I explained, my voice barely a whisper, that technically I'd authorized him to use the card when I handed it over. She understood, though, and instead helped me freeze all my accounts to prevent any more damage. I was so grateful but also so utterly terrified. My next stop was my friend Jenna's apartment. I needed somewhere to go, somewhere safe. Jenna had always been my absolute rock. I called her from the bank parking lot, practically hyperventilating, barely able to speak through my tears. Without a second's hesitation, she just said, "Come over. Now." 20 minutes later, I was huddled on her couch, a glass of wine in my hand, going through those bank statements line by excruciating line. Jenna was absolutely furious. She wanted to drive straight to my house and confront Mason right then and there. But I stopped her. "No," I said. "This requires strategy, not just raw emotion." I opened my laptop, my hands still shaking, and started searching for a lawyer specializing in financial fraud cases. I found one with incredible reviews, Robert Menden, and called his office immediately. His receptionist, bless her heart, squeezed me in for a consultation the very next morning. That night I barely slept. I tossed and turned on Jenna's couch, my mind a whirlwind of anger and pain, but also, surprisingly, a growing sense of cold determination. I was plotting my next moves. The morning came quickly. I arrived at Robert's office, clutching my folder of evidence like it was my lifeline. Robert was this stern-looking man in his 50s, with reading glasses perched on his nose, giving him an air of quiet authority. I laid out everything, the bank statements, the dates, the precise timing of everything. I even had screenshots I'd secretly taken from Ian's Instagram, showing him and Mason literally posing outside one of the Dubai hotels they'd booked with my money. Robert listened intently, taking notes, occasionally asking these sharp, clarifying questions that cut right to the chase. He explained that because I'd initially given Mason permission to use the card, it was a complicated case. But, he stressed, the fact that they'd used it for personal expenses of such a massive magnitude, without my knowledge or consent, could definitely constitute fraud. He agreed to take my case, and then he outlined our first crucial steps. I needed to file a police report immediately. He made a call right there, to a detective he knew at the local precinct, and arranged for me to meet with her that very afternoon. Detective Garcia was a no-nonsense woman with eyes that didn't miss a thing. She listened to my statement, took copies of all my evidence. Then she asked a question that really made me pause. "Has Mason ever done anything like this before?" I thought hard, and suddenly all these smaller discrepancies I brushed off over the years came flooding back. Times when bills seemed oddly high, instances where money just seemed to vanish from our joint account. I'd always blamed my own bad math, or just forgetfulness. But now? I wasn't so sure. Detective Garcia just nodded, knowingly. "This was a pattern," she said softly, "not an isolated incident." She warned me that these cases could take time, but she promised she'd do her best to build a solid case. As I walked out of the police station, my phone practically exploded with notifications. Mason had finally realized I was gone. His messages started innocently enough, casual questions about my whereabouts. Then they quickly escalated into angry demands, shouting in all caps about where the hell I was. I ignored every single one. I couldn't bring myself to even look at them. Instead, I called the wedding venue. Explaining the situation to Tim, the manager, was incredibly difficult, but he was so understanding. He couldn't refund our non-refundable deposit, which hurt, but he offered to reschedule our date for free if I ever wanted to use their services in the future. I thanked him, my voice flat, knowing full well I would never be marrying Mason. Next, the hardest call of all, my parents. My mom answered, her voice bubbling with excitement, ready to talk wedding details. The moment I heard her, I just broke down. Through ragged sobs, I explained everything that had happened. There was a long, terrible silence on her end, and then she just said quietly that they were catching the next flight to be with me. I protested weakly out of habit, but inside I felt this overwhelming wave of relief. I needed my family, now more than ever. The rest of that day was a blur of awful phone calls. Our other vendors, friends who were supposed to be in the wedding party, my boss. Each call I had to relive the humiliation, explain why I needed emergency time off. Everyone was shocked, of course, but thankfully incredibly supportive. Mason's calls and texts, however, were relentless. Non-stop. Around 7 p.m. it happened. He showed up at Jenna's apartment. We knew he would eventually figure out where I was. Jenna and I watched through the peephole as he pounded on the door, alternating between furious demands and pathetic, pleading apologies. We stayed completely silent, barely breathing, until he finally gave up and left. But the nightmare wasn't over. 10 minutes later, his brother Ian arrived and tried the exact same tactics. When that failed, he started threatening to call the police, claiming Jenna was kidnapping me. My brave Jenna nearly threw the door open to confront him, but I held her back. Instead, she did the smart thing. She called the police herself and reported him for harassment. A patrol car arrived within minutes. We watched from the window as the officer gave Ian a stern warning to leave the premises. The officer even knocked on Jenna's door afterward to check if we were okay. I briefly explained the situation, and he strongly advised me to consider getting a restraining order. This was getting so out of control. The next day felt like a whirlwind. My parents arrived, immediately booking a hotel nearby. Robert, my lawyer, called with updates on our case. Detective Garcia had already interviewed the bank staff and was building a solid file. I also met with a counselor specializing in financial abuse cases. That session was eye-opening. She helped me understand that what had happened wasn't my fault, something I desperately needed to hear. Around noon, an email from Mason popped up. The subject line read, "Explanation." I opened it with shaking hands, a knot of dread in my stomach. Inside was a long rambling message. He and Ian, he wrote, had been planning this brother's getaway for months, how they deserved a proper trip before the wedding tied him down. He actually tried to say I was overreacting to what was, essentially, just a loan. He promised to pay me back eventually, and honestly couldn't understand why I was making such a big deal of this. That email confirmed everything I needed to know. He felt entitled to my money. He saw absolutely nothing wrong with what he'd done. He was a monster. I didn't even reply. I just forwarded that email straight to Robert and Detective Garcia. Let them see the depths of his delusion. By the end of that week, Mason was officially facing criminal charges for fraud. The investigation started, and it quickly revealed that this wasn't the first time he and Ian had pulled something like this. Once news of the case started getting out, two of Mason's ex-girlfriends actually came forward with similar heartbreaking stories. One of them had lost nearly $20,000 to them through an identical scheme. It made me sick to think how many people they'd hurt. Mason's parents, of course, immediately hired an obscenely expensive attorney. And then they launched this vicious smear campaign against me. They told anyone who would listen that I was the gold digger, that I had supposedly consented to the purchases, and was now just vindicatively trying to ruin their poor son's life. Some mutual friends, people I thought I could trust, actually believed them. I lost people I genuinely thought would stand by me. That stung almost as much as the initial betrayal. The case dragged on for months. It was a brutal, exhausting process. Discovery revealed text messages between Mason and Ian, planning the entire thing, actually joking about how easy it was to manipulate me. My blood ran cold reading those. There were also messages to the two women they had apparently been seeing behind my back, explicitly inviting them to join them in Dubai. The investigators found these women and interviewed them. They confirmed it all. They had indeed met up with Mason and Ian in Dubai, all expenses paid with my money. The layers of deception just kept peeling back, each one more disgusting than the last. 6 months after what should have been our wedding day, Mason took a plea deal. He would serve 18 months in prison, pay full restitution, and be on probation for 3 years after his release. Ian received a similar sentence. I sat in the courtroom as the sentence was read. It was the first time I'd seen Mason since that awful day. Our eyes met across the room and he looked away first. That brief moment felt like a small, hollow victory. The judge made it crystal clear during sentencing that their actions constituted a serious breach of trust and severe financial abuse. It was a heavy, sobering day. As part of the settlement, I got all of my money back, plus additional damages. Mason's parents, those people who tried to brand me a gold digger, were forced to sell their vacation home to cover the costs when Mason's own accounts came up short. Oh, the irony. I used some of that money not for myself but to start a nonprofit organization. It was dedicated to helping victims of financial abuse navigate the confusing legal system and, more importantly, rebuild their shattered lives. Fast forward 3 years later, and my organization has already helped hundreds of people escape financially abusive relationships. I've spoken at conferences across the country, sharing my story, advocating for stronger legal protections. It's hard work, but it's meaningful work. And believe it or not, I found love again. With Keith. He's a financial advisor I met through my nonprofit work, and he's truly shown me what a healthy financial partnership looks like. Complete transparency, mutual respect. It's night and day from what I had with Mason. Mason was released from prison last year. I heard through mutual friends that he's working at his uncle's car dealership now, the only family member who would still employ him. Ian moved across the country after his release, desperately trying to escape his tarnished reputation. Sometimes I still think about the wedding that never happened, the years I wasted with someone who valued money so much more than love. The dreams we had, which turned out to be built on nothing but lies. But then I look at my life now. The meaningful work I do, the healthy, honest relationship I've built, the financial independence I've not just reclaimed but strengthened. And I know deep in my bones that walking out of that bathroom, head held high, was absolutely the best decision I ever made. The recovery wasn't easy, not by a long shot. Those first few weeks after discovering Mason's betrayal were genuinely some of the darkest, most hollow days of my entire life. I barely ate. I certainly didn't sleep. My mind was just a relentless loop, replaying every single moment of our relationship, searching frantically for signs I'd missed, for clues I should have seen. Detective Garcia, seeing how broken I was, connected me with a support group for victims of financial abuse. At the first meeting, I could barely even speak through my tears. But listening to other survivors, hearing their stories of betrayal and resilience, it helped me realize I wasn't alone. So many of them had experienced similar betrayals, often from people they had trusted completely. Some had lost far more than I had: retirement savings, their homes, even custody of their children, all due to financial manipulation. Their sheer resilience, their quiet strength, it truly inspired me. By the third meeting, I was finally able to share my full story. And after each session, I felt a little stronger, a little more certain that I would somehow get through this. My parents stayed in town for 2 solid weeks, helping me pack up my belongings from the house I had shared with Mason. We strategized, going only when we knew he would be at work. But of course, his parents had to show up halfway through, threatening to call the police for trespassing. My dad, usually the calmest person I know, got right in their faces. He told them exactly what he thought of them and their despicable son. The police did eventually show up, called by Mason's mother, but they quickly confirmed I had every right to retrieve my own belongings. The officers, clearly unimpressed by Mason's parents' behavior, even helped us carry some boxes to the moving truck. That was a small, satisfying moment. Finding a new place to live was another challenge, on top of canceling a wedding and managing all the legal proceedings. I ended up renting a small studio apartment. It was nothing fancy, just 4 walls and a roof, but it was mine. The first night there, surrounded by moving boxes, with just a mattress on the floor, I cried myself to sleep. Not because I missed Mason, not at all, but because I was mourning. Mourning the future I thought I would have, the dreams that had been shattered, the sacred trust that had been so brutally broken. Robert, my attorney, proved to be absolutely exceptional. He was methodical, relentless, leaving no stone unturned in building our case. He subpoenaed Mason and Ian's phone records, their bank statements, even their social media accounts. The evidence piled up, overwhelming and damning. Text messages revealed they had been planning this for months, meticulously waiting for the right opportunity to get access to my card. There were photos of them living it up in Dubai with my money, popping champagne on a yacht I had paid for, dining in restaurants where a single meal cost more than I made in a day. It was sickening. But the most painful discovery was an exchange between Mason and one of the women they had invited along. She had asked if he was really getting married in 2 weeks. His response, "Don't worry about that. It's just for my parents. Won't last long." Reading those words felt like being stabbed all over again. All those years, all those memories, all those promises, utterly meaningless to him. As the case progressed, I threw myself into work. My boss was incredibly understanding, allowing me flexible hours to attend legal meetings and therapy sessions. My colleagues truly rallied around me. They'd bring me lunch when I forgot to eat, listen patiently when I needed to vent, and simply care for me on my bad days. One particularly rough day, after a grueling deposition where Mason's attorney had tried to paint me as financially irresponsible, I returned to the office to find my desk covered in small gifts. Chocolates, a little plant, a funny card signed by everyone. It was such a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant the entire world to me. It reminded me that there were good people in the world, people who saw me. Social media during this time became both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it provided irrefutable evidence. Ian, in his monumental stupidity, had posted photos of their Dubai trip in real time, actually tagging their location at the exact hotels and restaurants that matched my bank statements. It was like he wanted to be caught. But it was also a cruel curse. Mason's family used their platforms to viciously portray me as a vindictive ex, spreading false accusations and outright lies. They said I was making things up, that I was a bitter woman trying to ruin their son's life. I eventually had to block them all. I just couldn't bear seeing their poison spread. Some mutual friends, people I had known for years, even those who were supposed to be in our wedding party, actually believed Mason's ridiculous story that I had simply overreacted to a misunderstanding. That hurt deeply. But others stood firmly by me, cutting ties with Mason and his family completely. The divisions were painful, tearing apart my social circle, but in a strange way they were clarifying. They showed me who my true friends really were. The district attorney, after reviewing all the evidence, decided to prosecute the case personally. She told me it was one of the most clear-cut cases of financial exploitation she had ever seen, and she wanted to make an example of them. Then the press got wind of the case, and suddenly my deeply private pain was splashed across public headlines. Local news outlets ran sensational stories. Dream wedding turns to nightmare. Bride savings stolen for Dubai getaway. I declined every single interview request, desperate to maintain what little privacy I had left. The weight of it all sometimes felt absolutely crushing. There were days I simply couldn't get out of bed. Days where the simplest tasks like making coffee seemed utterly impossible. My therapist diagnosed me with situational depression and recommended medication to help me through the worst of it. I was resistant at first, seeing it as a sign of weakness, but eventually I agreed. And honestly, the medication helped take the edge off, allowing me to function day to day while I slowly processed everything that had happened. The trial date was set for 8 months after the incident. As it approached, Mason's attorney reached out with a plea offer. They clearly wanted to avoid the spectacle of a very public trial. The terms seemed reasonable. Full restitution plus damages, jail time, and probation. After discussing it extensively with Robert and the DA, I agreed. Part of me, the raw, angry part, wanted the satisfaction of seeing Mason convicted by a jury. But another part, the exhausted, weary part, just wanted it all to be over. The plea hearing was scheduled for what would have been our first anniversary. I chose a specific outfit for court that day. A strong, tailored black suit that made me feel powerful, in control, even when my insides were churning. Mason appeared in a suit as well, but he looked diminished. Thinner, paler, with dark circles under his eyes. Our eyes met briefly as he entered the courtroom, and he quickly looked away. He couldn't even hold my gaze. The judge was a stern older woman who made it crystal clear she took financial crimes very, very seriously. When it came time for victim impact statements, I walked to the podium. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I spoke about trust and betrayal, about the emotional damage that went so far beyond the financial loss. I spoke about how Mason's actions hadn't just affected our relationship, but my ability to trust anyone. I spoke about the wedding that never happened, the future that had been brutally stolen from me. When I finished, the courtroom was absolutely silent. The judge thanked me for my statement and then turned to Mason. He offered a brief, clearly rehearsed apology that sounded completely hollow to my ears. The judge wasn't impressed either. She imposed the maximum sentence allowed under the plea agreement and added additional community service hours. She specifically ordered that his community service be performed at a women's shelter that helped victims of financial abuse. The irony was not lost on me. As Mason was led away in handcuffs, I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, just a profound, heavy sadness for everything that had been lost. All that wasted time, all that misplaced trust. Outside the courthouse, I made a brief statement to the press. I didn't try to vilify Mason, and I certainly didn't seek sympathy. Instead, I focused on raising awareness about financial abuse in relationships and the absolute critical importance of maintaining financial independence, even when you're sharing a life with someone. The story for a brief time made national news. I received hundreds of messages from people who had experienced similar, gut-wrenching betrayals. Their stories touched me so deeply and they sparked an idea of fire, really. With part of my settlement money, I started the Financial Freedom Foundation. It's a nonprofit dedicated to helping victims of financial abuse navigate the incredibly complex legal system and, most importantly, rebuild their lives from the ground up. We provided legal guidance, financial counseling, and much-needed emotional support. We also started working with legislators to strengthen laws protecting victims of financial exploitation. The foundation grew quickly, tapping into an unfortunately massive need. This work was incredibly healing for me. Each person we helped, each small victory, made my own traumatic experience seem more meaningful, as if some good, some lasting impact had actually come from it. After all, through the foundation I met Keith. He volunteered his services as a financial advisor, helping our clients rebuild their credit and create sustainable budgets. We worked closely together for months before he finally, hesitantly, asked me out. I hesitated, too, still so wary of relationships, still healing from my brutal experience with Mason. But Keith was patient. He was understanding of my caution. We started as friends, slowly getting to know each other. He was completely transparent about his own finances from the very beginning, showing me statements, openly discussing his approach to money management. It was so refreshing, a breath of fresh air after the years of secrecy and manipulation I had experienced with Mason. 6 months into dating, Keith proposed a joint project, rather than a joint account. We would each contribute to a shared investment in a rental property, with everything clearly documented and agreed upon in writing. It might sound unromantic perhaps, but it was exactly what I needed to rebuild my trust. The property turned out to be a fantastic investment, and more importantly, it showed me concretely that a financial partnership could be healthy and truly equal. On our 1-year anniversary, Keith proposed for real. The ring was modest, but so meaningful, designed with input from my closest friends to ensure it was something I would truly love. He had saved for it specifically, even showing me the dedicated account he had created for this purpose. I said yes, but with one condition: a prenuptial agreement that protected both of us. He agreed without a moment's hesitation. Our wedding was small and intimate, nothing like the elaborate, extravagant celebration I had planned with Mason. We held it at a local botanical garden, with just 50 guests, only the people who had stood by me through the darkest, most challenging period of my life. My father walked me down the aisle, tears in his eyes, whispering how proud he was of me for finding happiness again. The week before the wedding, I received a letter from Mason. He was still in prison but eligible for early release soon. The letter was long and, surprisingly, seemed genuinely remorseful. He explained how prison had forced him to confront his materialism and dishonesty. He didn't ask for forgiveness, but wanted me to know he regretted his actions deeply. I read the letter once, then filed it away. His journey was no longer my concern. My focus was on my future with Keith, on the foundation's vital work, on the beautiful life I had rebuilt from the absolute ashes of betrayal. Mason and Ian were released after serving 14 months of their 18-month sentences. Mason attempted to contact me again through mutual friends, but I firmly maintained my boundaries. Ian moved to Arizona to start over, apparently humbled by the experience. Their parents? They never apologized, never acknowledged their son's wrongdoing. Last I heard, they had relocated to Florida, seemingly distancing themselves from the entire scandal. Keith and I have been married for 2 years now. We recently bought our first home together. A modest, but beautiful house with a garden where I love to grow vegetables and flowers. We still maintain separate accounts, as well as a joint one for household expenses. Financial discussions are open and regular in our relationship. Nothing is hidden, nothing is assumed. The foundation continues to grow. We now have offices in 3 cities and a staff of incredibly dedicated professionals. We've even helped draft legislation that has been adopted in several states, creating stronger protections for victims of financial abuse. I still share my story at conferences and seminars, no longer embarrassed by my past naivety, but fiercely proud of my resilience. Sometimes when I look back on that day, standing in the bathroom, hearing Mason call me a bimbo, discovering the full, disgusting extent of his betrayal, I'm just amazed at how far I've come. That single, horrific moment could have broken me permanently. Instead, it became the unexpected catalyst for creating a life more authentic, more fulfilling, and more purposeful than anything I had ever imagined before. I walked out of that bathroom with my head held high, my goal crystal clear. To reclaim my power, my money, and my future. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but I did it. And in doing so, I found not just justice but something even more valuable. A profound sense of purpose that transcended my own experience. Using my pain to help others find their way back to solid ground. That's a wedding gift Mason never intended to give me, but it's one I treasure above all others. That first step out of Mason's house was just the beginning of a wild, incredibly challenging 5-year journey. I started by finding a cheap studio apartment, about 40 minutes from the city. Nothing fancy, just 4 walls, a tiny bathroom, and enough space for a bed and a desk. The landlord didn't ask too many questions when I paid 3 months upfront with cash from my emergency fund. The one Mason hadn't touched. That same day, I bought a used laptop from a pawn shop. The thing barely ran, sputtering and whirring, but it connected to the internet, and honestly, that's all I needed. That night, I sent out emails to 3 old college friends, explaining my situation without going into the messy, humiliating details. 2 responded within hours. One of them, bless her heart, offered me a temporary job at her marketing firm. I accepted immediately. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but I didn't care. It was income. It was legitimate. And it gave me a much-needed structure while I plotted my next moves, my mind constantly working. I started waking up at 5 a.m. every single morning. My mission? To document every single thing I could remember about Mason's business practices. Every casual conversation, every shady deal I'd inadvertently overheard, every questionable transaction I'd seen him make. My notes filled 17-word documents that first week alone. I organized them meticulously. By date, by business entity, by potential legal violation. The pattern became horrifyingly clear and quickly. Mason had been running sophisticated fraud schemes for years, and I, unknowingly, had signed papers that implicated me in some of them. This realization hit me like a truck on my 8th day of freedom. I actually threw up in my kitchen sink. Then I wiped my mouth, took a deep breath, and just kept writing. I needed evidence beyond my word against his. I reached out to an old classmate who had become a forensic accountant. We met for coffee near her office, and she listened without judgment as I outlined the entire, unbelievable situation. Her advice was simple but absolutely crucial. Document everything. Find the paper trails. Identify witnesses. She then recommended a specific lawyer who specialized in financial fraud cases. The lawyer's consultation fee was steep, a punch to my already struggling budget, but I paid it with my second paycheck from the marketing job. The meeting lasted a grueling 90 minutes. She asked tough questions, questions I wasn't fully prepared to answer. I left with homework and a growing, daunting understanding of the battle that lay ahead. I spent my nights digging through old emails and documents I'd saved without realizing their true importance. I found bank statements showing unusual transfers, tax documents with discrepancies that practically screamed at me now. Photos from company events suddenly showed key people Mason had claimed never to have met. I was building my case piece by piece, like assembling a massive, intricate jigsaw puzzle. The lawyer was genuinely impressed with my evidence collection. After our third meeting, she took my case on contingency. This small victory, knowing I wouldn't have to pay her up front, gave me my first real night of sleep in weeks. I celebrated by buying real groceries instead of just ramen, The legal process, though, moved at a painfully slow crawl. Depositions, discovery requests, they dragged on for months. Mason's legal team fought us at every turn, using every delay tactic imaginable. After 6 long months, they finally offered a settlement. The amount seemed huge at first glance, a dizzying sum. But my lawyer, Robert, wisely advised against accepting it. "That number represents pennies on the dollar of what was actually stolen from you," he said. So we pushed forward. I kept working my marketing job during the day. The routine, oddly enough, helped keep me sane. My boss, seeing my dedication and relentless focus, gave me a small promotion. I used that extra income to move to a slightly better apartment. This one actually had windows that opened fully, letting in fresh air. I even bought a proper desk at a thrift store. Then, in month 8, Robert called with breakthrough news. A former employee of Mason's had come forward with corroborating evidence. Documents that matched mine perfectly, and added crucial details I hadn't been privy to. The case suddenly had real momentum. Mason's legal team requested another meeting. Their new settlement offer was 4 times the original. My lawyer actually smiled for the first time since I'd met her. We countered at 6 times the amount. The negotiations were brutal. I sat through 14 hours of meetings over 3 exhausting days. I didn't speak much. My evidence spoke for me. We finally settled at 5 times the original offer, plus all legal fees. The terms included a non-disclosure agreement about the settlement amount itself, but not about the fraud. I signed the papers with a steady, triumphant hand. The money hit my account a week later. I paid off my student loans the same day. That feeling was indescribable. I bought a bottle of champagne, but weirdly I couldn't bring myself to open it. Victory felt hollow somehow. I realized then that I needed more than just my own justice. I needed change. I started researching similar fraud cases, even while still working my now full-time marketing position. Patterns emerged quickly, and they were heartbreaking. Dozens, hundreds of people in situations just like mine, absolutely shattered with no idea how to fight back. That's when the idea solidified. I created a simple website, offering resources and basic guidance. The site cost me a mere $300 to build, and I poured my nights and weekends into it for an entire month. The first email from a victim came just 2 days after launch. A woman in Arizona described a scenario eerily, chillingly similar to mine. I spent 3 hours crafting a detailed response, complete with resource links. A week later, she wrote back, saying she'd found a lawyer using my guidelines and her case was actually moving forward. 3 more emails arrived the following week. Then 7 the week after that. That's when I knew. I had found my purpose. I used a portion of my settlement to formally establish a nonprofit organization. The paperwork was daunting, yes, but nowhere near as complex as the brutal legal battle I had just survived. I named it the Phoenix Financial Recovery Network, PFRN. The logo was simple but meaningful. A rising bird made of numbers. I hired a part-time assistant to help manage the rapidly growing number of inquiries. Maria, my assistant, had escaped financial abuse herself. She understood our mission on a cellular level. The organization grew steadily over the next 2 years. We partnered with law firms willing to take cases on contingency. We created clear step-by-step guides for documenting financial crimes. We built a network of forensic accountants who offered reduced rates to our clients. In the 3rd year, I made a terrifying but necessary decision. I quit my marketing job to run PFRN full-time. Our caseload had tripled and we simply couldn't keep up with just part-time effort anymore. I took a modest salary from the organization, just enough to cover my expenses and save a little each month. The work consumed my days and often my nights. But I didn't mind. Each success story, each life we helped to reclaim, fueled me more than sleep ever could. A deeply troubling pattern began to emerge in our cases. Many financial predators faced minimal consequences, despite causing massive, devastating harm. They'd simply pay settlements using insurance policies designed for exactly this purpose, then move on to new victims with disturbing ease. It made my blood boil. I started meticulously documenting these systemic failures. By the 4th year, all that research culminated in a comprehensive report, which we published online, filled with detailed recommendations for legal reforms. That report, against all odds, caught the attention of a state senator with a strong background in consumer protection. Her office reached out to discuss potential legislation. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. I prepared for days, rehearsing key points and statistics until I could recite them in my sleep. The senator was genuinely impressed by our data and, most importantly, by the raw power of the personal stories we shared. She invited me to testify at an upcoming committee hearing. Public speaking had always terrified me, made my stomach clench, but I said yes anyway. This was too important. The hearing was scheduled 6 weeks out. I prepared meticulously for my 5 minutes of testimony. I practiced in front of Maria until she could recite it right along with me. The day arrived with stomach-churning intensity. The committee room was smaller than I had imagined. 8 legislators sat behind a curved desk. I took my seat at the witness table, the microphone in front of me seeming unnecessarily intimidating. But once I started, my testimony flowed better than in any practice session. The statistics and the stories connected in ways I hadn't even planned. Questions followed from 3 committee members. I answered each one clearly, despite my pounding heart. The committee chair thanked me for my insights. The proposed bill moved forward with amendments reflecting our recommendations. It passed the following session with bipartisan support. The governor signed it on a Thursday morning. I was invited to the ceremony but couldn't attend due to a client emergency. The new law created stronger penalties for financial fraud involving intimate partners. It established better restitution mechanisms for victims. It wasn't perfect, but my God, it was progress. Real tangible progress. Our caseload at PFRN absolutely doubled after that legislation passed. It was incredible. We were able to hire 3 more staff members using grant funding, and our office expanded from one small room to a bustling suite. I finally bought myself a proper desk, not secondhand this time. A small, quiet personal victory. The organization's 5th anniversary approached with surprising speed. It felt like just yesterday I was crying on Jenna's couch. We planned a modest celebration with our clients and supporters at a community center. We had actually helped save from a predatory loan scheme. The decorations were minimal but so meaningful. Success stories printed on large posters lined the walls. The room filled quickly with people whose lives had intersected with ours. Former clients now confident volunteering as mentors. Lawyers who had taken cases pro bono, mingling with the forensic accountants. Local officials who had championed our cause stopped by with heartfelt congratulations. I had prepared brief remarks, but when I approached the microphone, I found myself completely overwhelmed. 5 years of emotions crashed together in my chest. I breathed deeply, trying to steady myself, and began anyway. I told my story one more time, but I focused on what came after. The rebuilding, the purpose, the incredible community we had created together. The applause that followed wasn't just for me. It was for everyone in that room who had refused to remain a victim. The celebration continued well into the evening, buzzing with energy. After most of the speeches were done, I quietly slipped away. The cool night air felt cleansing somehow. I walked 6 blocks to a small park and sat on a bench. Stars, tiny pinpricks, peeked through the city's light pollution. I realized I hadn't really looked up in months. My phone buzzed with a news alert. I almost ignored it, but then I saw Mason's name in the headline. He had been indicted on 38 counts of fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. These cases were unrelated to mine, but they followed the exact same sickening patterns. Federal prosecutors had built their case over 2 years of intense investigation. The article even mentioned 3 other victims who had come forward after finding resources through PFRN. I sat perfectly still for several minutes. No tears came. No anger surfaced. Just a profound, quiet sense of completion washed over me. Justice wasn't just about my case anymore. It was about changing the entire system that had protected him, and others like him, for so long. I walked back to the celebration with a renewed, deep-seated purpose. The next morning brought a flood of media requests. News outlets, eager for a sensational story, wanted comments on Mason's indictment and our connection to the case. I declined most interviews, but agreed to one with a respected financial journal. The reporter asked thoughtful questions about systemic issues rather than just the salacious details. The resulting article generated our largest donation to date, a truly incredible amount. We used the funds to launch a new education program targeting college students. Financial literacy became our secondary mission. Prevention seemed just as important as recovery. We created workshops for identifying financial red flags in relationships, and universities across the country began requesting our presentations for their orientation programs. I trained 4 staff members to deliver the curriculum when demand exceeded my availability. The work evolved in ways I never could have anticipated. We expanded into research partnerships with law schools, using data from our cases to inform academic papers on financial abuse patterns. I even co-authored 3 studies that directly influenced regulatory changes in banking oversight. Mason's trial began during our 6th year of operation. I attended the opening arguments, not out of vengeance, but out of a strange curiosity. He looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than the man who had once controlled every aspect of my life. His defense team presented laughably weak explanations for documented fraud. The prosecution methodically dismantled each excuse with evidence remarkably similar to what I had painstakingly gathered years earlier. The jury deliberated for just 7 hours. Guilty on 32 counts. The sentencing hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later. I didn't attend. The outcome, I realized, didn't matter as much as I thought it would. He received 12 years in federal prison. The news barely registered emotionally. I had moved beyond needing his punishment for my closure. His other victims were my focus now. We helped 3 of them recover assets he had hidden in offshore accounts. The process took months of forensic accounting and clever legal maneuvering, but the victory celebration was sweeter than any I had experienced personally. PFRN expanded into 3 new states that year. We established satellite offices with local partners, our model proving adaptable to different legal jurisdictions. I traveled frequently to train new teams and establish protocols. The work remained challenging, but incredibly fulfilling in ways I couldn't have imagined on that bathroom floor years earlier. And slowly, so slowly, my personal life began to re-emerge from the shadow of my mission. I started dating again after nearly 7 years of self-imposed solitude. Nothing serious at first, just coffee meetings and occasional dinners. I approached relationships with immense caution and a new hyper-aware consciousness. Red flags that I once would have foolishly ignored now stood out like blaring emergency flares. I met Daniel at a financial crimes conference in Denver. He ran a cybersecurity firm specializing in identity protection. Our conversation started professionally but evolved so naturally. He asked thoughtful questions about my work without ever prying into my personal history. We exchanged business cards and LinkedIn profiles. 3 days later, he emailed me with information on a security protocol our organization might find useful. No pressure, no expectations, just genuine professional courtesy. Our professional relationship developed over 6 months before he finally, hesitantly, asked me to dinner. I accepted after careful consideration. The evening was refreshingly normal. He talked about growing up in Minnesota. I shared stories about my college years. Neither of us even mentioned work for the first 2 hours. We dated slowly by modern standards. Monthly dinners became bi-weekly. Phone calls became regular but never intrusive. He respected boundaries I hadn't even needed to verbalize. 8 months into our relationship, I finally shared my full story. We sat on his balcony on a clear summer night. The telling took nearly 3 hours. He listened without interruption, asked clarifying questions only when I paused, offered no judgment or excessive sympathy, just deep understanding and quiet presence. Our relationship deepened profoundly after that night. Trust, surprisingly, came easier than I expected. We moved in together after 18 months of dating. His house became our home with minimal adjustment. He even cleared half his office for my work needs, and I made space in my schedule for actual weekends again. PFRN continued growing under stronger, more distributed leadership. I promoted Maria to operations director in our 8th year. She had earned the position through tireless dedication and innovative program development. The organization no longer depended solely on my daily presence. This structural change allowed me to focus on strategic initiatives and policy work. We launched a dedicated legislative advocacy arm, focused entirely on financial abuse laws. I testified before congressional committees twice that year. Federal lawmakers began considering our model legislation for national implementation. The work remained challenging, but it was increasingly impactful. Our 9th anniversary approached with significant momentum. We had helped recover over $70 million for victims across 17 states. More importantly, we had helped change laws in 11 jurisdictions. Our prevention programs reached over 20,000 college students annually. Our research partnerships produced actionable data for regulatory reforms. The organization had outgrown its origin story. It now belonged to the hundreds of survivors who contributed their experiences and expertise. I began planning a leadership transition for our 10th year. The decision wasn't about stepping away, but about evolving my role. The organization needed different skills for its next phase of growth. I identified 3 potential candidates from within our incredible team. The succession planning took 6 months of careful discussion and assessment. The board unanimously approved Kesha Johnson as the next executive director. She had joined us as a client 4 years earlier and risen to become our most effective advocate. Her financial background and deeply personal experience made her uniquely qualified. The transition announcement generated unexpected media interest. Several major publications requested interviews about our first decade of work. The resulting stories focused less on my personal journey and more on the systemic changes we had achieved together. This shift in narrative felt like the ultimate success. My wedding to Daniel happened quietly the same month as the leadership transition. We invited 30 close friends to a ceremony in his backyard. Maria served as my maid of honor. The celebration was simple, joyful, and deeply meaningful. Mason crossed my mind only once during the entire day. The thought was fleeting and held absolutely no power over me. Daniel and I honeymooned in Portugal for 2 weeks. The trip marked my first true vacation in nearly a decade. I checked email only once every 3 days. The organization continued functioning perfectly in my absence. This reality was both humbling and incredibly liberating. We returned home to news that the Federal Financial Abuse Prevention Act had passed, with provisions drafted by our legal team. The legislation created new protections for victims and accountability for perpetrators. Kesha had testified brilliantly at the final committee hearing. My role had, in the best possible way, become obsolete. I transitioned to board chair the following month. The position allowed me to provide governance oversight while stepping back from daily operations. Kesha implemented several brilliant innovations I had never even considered. The organization flourished under her leadership. Expansion continued into 5 additional states. Our 10th anniversary celebration was held at a downtown convention center. Over 400 people attended. Former clients, staff, volunteers, and supporters filled the room with palpable energy. The success stories covered an entire wall in caption photographs. Thousands more had been helped without ever having their pictures taken. I delivered brief remarks focusing on the future rather than the past. The standing ovation wasn't just for me, but for what we had all built together. As I looked across the room, I realized something profound had shifted. The organization no longer needed my pain as its foundation. It had transformed into something self-sustaining and ever-evolving. My personal healing had completed alongside this magnificent transformation. The vengeance that once drove me had been replaced by something far more powerful: systemic change. I returned to my table where Daniel waited with a warm, supportive smile. Maria raised her glass in a silent toast. Kesha commanded the room with natural authority as she outlined our vision for the next decade. The future stretched before us, filled with possibilities I couldn't have imagined from that bathroom floor 10 years earlier. I hadn't just reclaimed my power and money. I had discovered how to transform personal tragedy into collective progress. That night, surrounded by hundreds of lives touched by our work, I finally understood. Mason hadn't taken everything from me. He had unwittingly given me the perspective to see what truly mattered. The organization would continue its mission long after my story became a footnote in its history. The wedding gift I treasured wasn't about justice for one person. It was about creating justice for thousands. That journey, from victim to survivor to advocate, had been worth every painful step. And as I looked toward the future, I knew the most important chapters were yet to be written. I sat down, my pen dropping onto the open journal, and let out a deep, shuddering breath. The pages in front of me contained my entire journey, every single painful detail meticulously documented. I glanced at my watch. 3:47 a.m. Sleep wasn't coming tonight. Not with tomorrow looming ahead. The congressional hearing would start at 9 a.m. sharp. My testimony was scheduled for 11. I had practiced my statement dozens of times, But my hand still trembled when I thought about facing those senators, those powerful faces. The trembling didn't bother me anymore, though. I accepted it as part of who I'd become. I stood up and walked to the hotel window, pulling back the heavy curtain. Washington, D.C. sparkled below, monuments illuminated against the vast night sky. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, my reflection staring back at me. Tired eyes and a few new gray hairs I hadn't noticed before. The woman looking back seemed both intimately familiar and strangely foreign. I let the curtain fall closed and grabbed my phone. 3 missed calls from Sarah. She was probably worried sick. I shot her a quick text. Still awake. Nervous but ready. Her reply came seconds later. You've got this. We all believe in you. I smiled, a genuine if anxious smile. The organization had truly become my family over these past 5 years. I returned to the small desk and opened my laptop. The faces of our newest survivors appeared on the screen, their stories meticulously cataloged in our database. Each one drove me forward. Each one justified all the sleepless nights, all the sacrifices. I clicked through their profiles, committing details to memory. These weren't just cases. They were people with dreams that Mason and men like him had tried to shatter. I closed the laptop and began pacing the room. My testimony needed to honor their experiences. The hotel room felt increasingly claustrophobic. I grabbed my keycard and headed for the door. The hallway was silent at this hour. I took the elevator to the lobby, nodding at the night clerk, who barely looked up from his magazine. I pushed through the revolving door into the humid summer night. The air felt thick in my lungs. I began walking with no real destination in mind, my footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalk. The Capitol building loomed in the distance, illuminated and imposing. In just a few hours I would walk up those steps. I would enter those hallowed halls. I would tell my story, our story, to people with the power to change things. My phone buzzed. Sarah again. Get some sleep, boss. I smiled at her motherly tone. Sarah had been there from the very beginning, helping to build our survivor network from absolutely nothing. I turned back toward the hotel, suddenly aware of my exhaustion. Maybe, just maybe, sleep would actually come now. Morning arrived with harsh sunlight streaming through the gap in the curtains. I blinked awake, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar ceiling. Reality rushed back quickly. Today was the day. I showered and dressed with deliberate care. The navy blue suit was new, purchased specifically for this appearance. I applied minimal makeup, just enough to hide the dark circles under my eyes. The woman in the mirror looked professional, composed, determined. I barely recognized myself. The organization had arranged a car service. The driver remained silent during our journey to Capitol Hill, and I was so grateful for the quiet. I reviewed my notes one last time, my heart thrumming. The car pulled to a stop at the designated entrance. Cameras flashed immediately. I hadn't expected the media presence so early. Sarah appeared at my side, seemingly materializing from the crowd, her arm linking with mine as we climbed the steps. Remember to breathe, she whispered. We passed through security without incident. The hearing room buzzed with activity. Staffers rushed about with important-looking folders. Journalists jockeyed for position, securing their spots. I was directed to a small waiting room. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-looking men from another era. Time moved strangely as I waited. Minutes stretched like hours. Then suddenly, a young aide appeared at the door. They're ready for you now. The walk to the witness table felt like walking underwater. Faces blurred in my peripheral vision. The chairman's gavel struck loudly. The room fell silent. I adjusted the microphone and began my testimony. The words came easier than expected. I described the organization's work without overt emotion, though every word was infused with it. I presented our data methodically. The numbers I knew spoke for themselves. 5,000 survivors helped in 5 years. 300 perpetrators held accountable. 76 policy changes across 14 states. The senators asked predictable questions, and I answered each one directly. No embellishment, no dramatization. Just facts, just truth. Senator Hawkins leaned forward when I finished. And what about your personal experience, Miss Chun? The room grew impossibly quiet. I had prepared for this moment. My personal experience, I said, my voice steady, certainly informed our methodology, Senator. But today, I'm here representing thousands of survivors. The senator nodded, seemingly satisfied. I had successfully redirected. My personal story wasn't the point anymore. The hearing concluded after 3 intense hours. I gathered my materials with steady hands. Sarah appeared at my side again. "You were magnificent," she said, her eyes shining. We exited through a side door, skillfully avoiding the press. The car waited exactly where promised. I collapsed into the back seat, suddenly utterly drained. Sarah handed me a bottle of water. "The funding bill passed committee," she said. "It's headed to the floor vote next week." I nodded, allowing myself a small smile. Phase 1 complete. The hotel bar seemed like the appropriate place to decompress. I ordered a scotch neat. Sarah chose white wine. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. "Mason's lawyer called again," Sarah finally said. I stared into my glass. What did he want this time? Sarah sighed. "Same deal. He drops the appeal if you drop the civil suit." I shook my head, a firm, decisive movement. Not happening. Mason's 10-year sentence had been hard won. His legal team had fought viciously. His wealth had nearly bought his freedom, nearly. The civil suit was about more than just money now, it was about precedent. The hotel room felt less oppressive with one victory behind me. I kicked off my shoes and changed into comfortable clothes. My phone buzzed with congratulatory messages. The organization's board members, other survivors, even my mother, who had finally started to truly understand my mission. I ordered room service and opened my laptop. Work never stopped, not even on milestone days. New cases needed review. Staff needed direction. Funding needed allocation. I worked until my eyes burned. Sleep came easily that night. The morning brought a different energy. I packed quickly and checked out early. The flight back to Chicago departed at noon. I had built our headquarters there deliberately, away from coastal power centers, centered in America's heartland. The organization needed to reach everyone, not just those in privileged zip codes. The airport hummed with activity. I navigated security efficiently. My phone rang as I reached the gate. The display showed a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Is this Amelia Chen?" A woman's voice asked. I confirmed my identity. "This is Detective Rodriguez from Denver PD. Your organization was recommended by the DA's office." I signaled to the gate agent that I needed a moment. The detective explained her situation quickly. 6 new victims had come forward. The perpetrator was a wealthy real estate developer. Local resources were limited. Could we help? I promised to call back within the hour. This was exactly why we existed. This was the purpose that had emerged from my pain. The flight passed quickly as I reviewed the Denver case files. The pattern was agonizingly familiar. A powerful man, multiple victims, institutional protection. By the time we landed in Chicago, I had drafted a detailed response plan. Our office occupied the entire 5th floor of a converted warehouse. The space was intentionally welcoming. Soft lighting, comfortable furniture, living plants everywhere. I walked through the main work area, greeting staff members by name. Their energy was infectious, their dedication humbling. My office overlooked the river. I dropped my bag and sat heavily in my chair. The wall opposite my desk displayed framed legislation. Each document represented lives changed. Each signature a step toward justice. I opened my laptop and began writing the Denver response plan. Our organization would send 3 advocates. They would coordinate with local authorities. They would support the victims through every stage. They would ensure resources reached those who needed them most. I worked through lunch, barely noticing the hours passing. My assistant knocked softly around 4 p.m. "The board meeting starts in 15 minutes, she reminded me. I thanked her and gathered my presentation materials. The conference room filled quickly with board members, both in person and on screen. I presented our quarterly results confidently. The metrics were impressive. Growth continued on all fronts, funding remained stable, our influence expanded steadily. Questions came rapid-fire after my presentation. I answered each one thoroughly. The board had always respected my expertise. They had backed my vision from the beginning. The meeting concluded with unanimous approval for the Denver intervention. I returned to my office as evening fell over the city. The river reflected orange and purple from the setting sun. I allowed myself a moment of stillness. 5 years of building. 5 years of fighting. 5 years of transforming pain into purpose. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother. "Saw you on the news." Mom cried. "Proud of you." I smiled at his simple message. Family had been complicated after everything happened. They hadn't understood my choices initially. Time had healed some wounds. Others remained tender. I gathered my things and headed for the elevator. My apartment was 20 minutes from the office. The commute gave me time to decompress. The city lights blurred as I drove. Chicago had become home in ways I hadn't anticipated. My building's doorman greeted me warmly. "Package came for you, Miss Chun." He handed me a heavy envelope. No return address. I thanked him and continued to the elevator. My apartment welcomed me with familiar silence. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door. The envelope felt ominous in my hand. I opened it carefully. Inside was a newspaper. The headline announced Mason's appeal had been denied. A small note was paperclipped to the page. "Justice prevails. Keep fighting. J. Judge Jefferson." She had presided over Mason's original trial. Her support had remained unwavering. I placed the newspaper on my kitchen counter. A small victory, absolutely worth celebrating. I opened a bottle of wine and stepped onto my small balcony. The city sprawled before me, millions of lives intersecting. Somewhere out there were more survivors who hadn't found their voices yet. More perpetrators who thought themselves untouchable. More institutions enabling abuse through silence. My work, I knew, would never truly end. Morning came with renewed purpose. I arrived at the office early. The Denver team needed a final briefing before departure. I gathered them in my office, reviewing strategies and resources. These 3 women had all been where those Denver victims now stood. They understood the arduous journey ahead. I watched them board their flight via the airport security feed. Our organization had allies everywhere. Technology had become our greatest asset. I returned to my desk and opened the legislative tracking system. 17 bills across 12 states. Each one addressing some aspect of survivor justice. Each one needing support, testimony, data. I assigned staff to each priority item. The system we built worked efficiently now. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. "Miss Chun, this is Congressman Wallace's office." The voice sounded young, probably a staff assistant. "The congressman would like to meet next week about the SAFE Act." I checked my calendar quickly. "I can be in Washington on Wednesday." The assistant confirmed the appointment and hung up. The SAFE Act represented our most ambitious legislative goal yet. Comprehensive reform at the federal level. 2 years of our drafting, countless revisions, powerful opposition. I texted Sarah immediately. "Wallace wants to meet Wednesday in D.C." Her response came quickly. "I'll book your flight." The week passed in a blur of activity. The Denver team reported significant progress. Local authorities had welcomed our resources. Victims were receiving proper support. The perpetrator's legal team was already showing cracks. Tuesday evening found me on another plane. Washington never got easier to visit. The city held too many difficult memories for me. Even now, my hotel room overlooked the same view as before, the monuments, the history, the power. I unpacked methodically, hanging tomorrow's suit carefully. The SAFE Act briefing materials covered my bed. I reviewed each page, committing key points to memory. Sleep came fitfully that night. Dreams of Mason intruded, despite the years between us. His face morphed into other faces, other perpetrators, other men who had taken what wasn't theirs to take. I woke before dawn, resigned to starting the day early.
Chicago welcomed me with clear skies and moderate temperatures. My apartment felt increasingly like sanctuary. The space contained no memories of Mason, no echoes of past trauma. Only the present and future existed here. Friday brought the Denver team home. Their intervention had successfully concluded. 16 victims had received justice and support. The perpetrator faced decades in prison. Local resources had been properly trained. I greeted the team personally at the airport. Their exhausted faces showed both triumph and the cost. This work demanded everything and returned immeasurable value. The weekend arrived with welcome timing. I slept late for the first time in months. My body needed recovery after weeks of intensity. The foundation award ceremony approached quickly. Preparations required attention. My speech needed careful consideration. The organization's story deserved proper telling. I worked on drafts throughout Saturday. Words came easily when describing our mission, the journey from personal trauma to collective action, the transformation of pain into purpose, the future still waiting to be built. Sunday evening found me satisfied with the final version. The speech balanced personal and professional appropriately. It honored those we served without exploiting their stories. It celebrated progress while acknowledging work still needed. Monday morning brought unexpected news. Mason had died in prison. Apparent heart attack. No suspicious circumstances. The email from our legal team contained just the basic facts. I sat motionless at my desk. The information produced no immediate emotion. This man who had once dominated my existence had exited the world. His death changed nothing about our work. Justice had already been secured through legal channels. His victims had already received their settlements. His name had already faded from public consciousness. I closed the email without responding. Life continued its forward momentum. The foundation ceremony approached rapidly. Travel arrangements were confirmed. My speech was finalized. Professional attire was selected. My team would attend in full support. New York welcomed us with typical hustle. Our hotel overlooked Central Park. The team gathered in the lobby, excitement evident. This recognition validated their countless sacrifices. The ceremony venue sparkled with elegant lighting. Notable figures from philanthropic circles mingled casually. We entered as a unified group. The organization had truly become something beyond my original vision. The program proceeded with practice timing. Previous award recipients spoke briefly. Foundation directors explained selection criteria. Finally, our organization's name was announced. I approached the podium amid genuine applause. My prepared remarks waited on the lectern. I looked out at the assembled audience, wealthy donors, policymakers, media representatives. My gaze found my team's supportive faces. These people who had built something remarkable from tragedy. These colleagues who had become family through shared purpose. I began speaking with clear conviction. 5 years ago, I was defined by what had been taken from me. The room fell completely silent. Today, we are defined by what we've built together. The speech continued for exactly 7 minutes. My words traced our journey with appropriate humility. The foundation president presented the award afterward, a simple crystal sculpture representing transformation. The physical object mattered less than what it represented: recognition, validation, support for continued growth. The evening concluded with networking and congratulations. My team navigated the room with practiced professionalism. These people had become advocates in their own right. These colleagues carried our mission forward daily. The hotel bar seemed the appropriate place for team celebration. Glasses were raised in sincere toasts. Stories were shared with comfortable familiarity. Laughter came easily after years of shared purpose. I observed the scene with quiet satisfaction. The organization would indeed continue long after my story became a footnote. The future chapters remained unwritten, but full of promise. Mason hadn't taken everything from me after all. He had inadvertently launched something far more powerful than he could have imagined. My journey from victim to survivor to advocate continued, evolving. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More survivors would need support. More perpetrators would require accountability. More institutions would need transformation. The work continued without endpoint. The mission expanded with each passing year, and I remained ready for whatever came next. It's been a long journey, filled with so much pain, but also incredible purpose. I truly believe that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to create light, not just for ourselves, but for others. What about you? Have you ever had a moment that completely shattered your world, only to realize it was the catalyst for something extraordinary? I'd love to hear your thoughts, your experiences. Share them in the comments below.